Pardon me. Yes. Yes, Mr. Putin. I will tell her. We don't know what LBGT means. But tell her we know what KGB means. Tell Yasin we know where she lives. Thank you. Couldn't resist. I was trying to beg off. He saw me up front here. Beg, but he wouldn't let me. I don't like to use his name, but President Richard Nixon declared drugs to be public enemy number one. And in execution of that mandate, he said that every state shall have a state plan of drug abuse and every state shall have a drug czar. I ended up writing a state plan for Indiana, and I ended up being the drug czar for a very interesting governor, a doctor who was a strange little duck, but he was just a fabulous politician. And he was very, very important to me on a number of levels. We became colleagues. I was in his cabinet. And he had two flaws. He was a Republican, and he loved the Indy race cars. And every year, the cabinet was cordially, quote, invited, unquote, to his box at the Indy 500 to watch and listen and smell this horrible thing. I can't stand racing. And for 3 hours you sat there, and every year we had to do that for 8 years. I had to appear once a year with him. And the other was he was a Republican, and at one point he asked me to run for the Senate. Birch Bayh, I think, or Vance Hartke, one of the two was retiring, and he asked me to run. I'm a Democrat. And my wife is a personal friend of Hubert Humphrey. She had an apoplectic fit because I would have to change parties. So I always wonder what would have happened had I ever changed parties and ran for the Senate. Lugar lasted 33 years in the Senate, so that might have changed my life. It would have been very interesting to have a gender change in the U.S. Senate. But the point was, I didn't do it. Dodie was happy. That's my wife's name, Dolores Dodie. And when we went to Indiana, the First Lady of Indiana, Beth Bowen, took as her cause mental retardation. And it so happened that my wife ran a mental retardation center. They became good friends, bosom buddies. And so with the governor as my friend, Beth as her friend, we had a very fine foursome. And we would often be with the governor and his wife. And as the years went on, it became apparent that I couldn't really last in the gender role of birth. My wife was sad at what was going to happen. I was sad. But nevertheless, there came the time when I had to see the governor and let him know that I was going to be resigning because I was going to be entering a preoperative gender change role. He was very interested in that. And we had a very long session. And the night before we left Indiana, he asked that my wife and I come to a supper at the governor's mansion, and that I appear as Nancy, which was the very first time I did that in public. We went to the governor's mansion, and Beth was there, and Otis Bowen, the governor, was there, and Dodie and I. It was the most fascinating, delightful, yet sad dinner that I've ever been at, which really comes down to the two-edged word that communion really is. It is delightful, and it can be very hard. There are times when communion is really difficult. For example, last week, and I mean this because I sort of sat in my pew and cried like a baby. Vicky's birthday, and her parents were here. And her parents are elderly. And it was very, in one way, sad to see the communion ceremony and all that it meant, the beauty of it, and in a way the sadness of it. The sadness because they are elderly, and this probably was going to be the last time that that would take place. I point this out because it's an example from our community here. And sometimes it is very, very tragic in the sense that I remember when I was chaplain in Vietnam, my server boy from Boston, Massachusetts, was with me at this make-up altar that we had. We were in the field, and Nam was a smelly, stinking place. And in the middle of the Mass, the service, all of a sudden the whine of a bullet, and he was dead. And I never forget that. That was a communion that I never, never, never will ever forget. And then there is the communion that happens when you're with friends and everything is really A-OK, as they say. The communion with the meal with the governor and his wife and my wife. While we traded tears, we broke bread. The governor was so gracious. Besides, he gave me a huge check to take with me. But most importantly, he was very supportive. It didn't always happen that way with other people. But Governor Bowen and his wife Beth were very gracious to my wife and I. And it was in a way, a joyful communion, a bringing together over breaking bread. And my hope and prayer is that I wish you have a Governor Bowen in your life. And that the communions that we have, while some may be sad and some may even be tragic, hopefully all of them are moving to help us grow in wisdom, if you will, and grace. That is my wish, that your communions here and wherever be fruitful for you, and that no sniper ever be able to take your holy life and make it worthless. We all have a value and a worth. And communion is a time when, if we wish, we can share joy and sorrow, happiness and tragedy. And I wish all of these to you. In short, again, as strange as it may sound, I could do no better than to wish you all a Governor Bowen in your life.